Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to take a look at the 12 types of layers available in Photoshop, and there's a lot of them, so we don't want to get overwhelmed at this point. I just want to quickly show you each of the different types of layers so you are aware of the different types of layers and the power of all these different layers to help you fulfill your creative vision. So right now we're just going to briefly go over all of the different layers, and then in upcoming tutorials and projects we will go into more detail about these individual types of layers and how you can use them to fulfill your creative vision. So for now we're just going to go over the basics, and the other thing I want to mention real quick is you're going to use some of these layer types a lot more than others. It's all going to depend on the type of work that you do and your workflow. But some of these layer types you're going to use on every single project, and the background layer is one of those. So let's go ahead and go over that type of layer first. So your background layer is always located at the bottom of all other layers. It also comes locked automatically, and there are limitations on what you can do with this particular layer. You can't rearrange it, you can't delete it, and you can't move any contents within it while it is locked. And I'll show you how to unlock it in just a second. Now the sole purpose of this type of layer is, well, it's the background for the rest of your document. When you open up an image file, it will be located on a background layer. And the thing is, you don't want to work directly on this background layer to edit that particular image. And I'm going to explain more about why in an upcoming tutorial. Now, when you create a new document, you can specify the color of that background layer. And once you create that new document, it will automatically be locked with the color that you chose. So that's your default layer when opening or creating new documents. Now you can actually take a brush and paint color on it, but there's really not much else you can do with it. But let's say you want to convert this background layer to a regular layer that you can do more with. Well, to do that, just double click on the layer, give it a new name, and click OK, and then it will become unlocked. Then you can do whatever you want with this particular layer like any other layer. Now the next type of layer I want to talk about is grouped layers, because this particular document has 3 grouped layers that you can see right now. So we have layers, 12 types of layers, and 3 types of layer customizations. And we know they're grouped layers because it has this folder icon next to each name, and then this little arrow to the left of the icon. So if you click on that little arrow, it will expand and show you all the layers inside of the grouped layer. So grouped layers are used to help you manage and organize your layers into groups. And then within the grouped layer, you can add any type of layer. So we have a regular type of layer here, which is a text layer, and then we have additional grouped layers. So you can put grouped layers and other grouped layers as many times as you want based on how you want to organize all those different layers. And believe me, when you're working on a project and you have hundreds of different types of layers, it's nice to organize them into groups to make it easier to locate specific layers, unless of course you go up and you type in the name and filter out that way. But this is another way to help you manage all the different layers you're working on. So the next most common type of layer is a pixel layer. And if you're a photographer or an artist, a painter, then you're going to be using a pixel layer a lot. So a pixel layer is basically, well, it allows you to add pixels to that layer. So even this icon itself is a pixel layer because it contains pixels. So with your pixel layer, you can rearrange the pixels based on your creative vision. And we're going to learn a lot about how we can adjust these different pixels for our creative vision in upcoming lessons. Now, the opposite of a pixel layer would be considered a vector layer. So in the beginning of the course, we went over the difference between pixels and vectors. And as you know, vectors are not necessarily pixels, but a graphic file that you can resize without loss of quality, whereas a pixel graphic, you're going to lose quality as you resize it larger. So a vector layer is one in which you create a shape. So if I create a rectangle, we now have a vector layer, and we can see in the bottom right of that thumbnail, we have a little icon. So that's what I have here as well. So this icon represents vector layers. So anytime you see this particular icon, you'll know that it's a vector layer. And there's other ways to create vector layers as well. For example, with your pen tool, or maybe you add a document created in another program like Adobe Illustrator, you can also have that particular document added as a vector layer as well. Okay, next we have type layers. So the type layer is pretty self-explanatory. When you add text, you end up with a type layer. And if we take a look at this layer here, we can see a letter T next to it. So anytime you see this letter T, you will know that that's a type layer. Now this particular layer here used to be a type layer, and you can convert type layers to pixel layers like this one here simply by right-clicking on a layer and selecting rasterize type, and then it will become a graphic or a pixel layer instead of a type layer. Now the other thing is I'm using a specific font for all these different groups of names and the title, and when you opened up this document, it probably said that specific fonts were missing. And that's because you don't have these specific fonts installed on your system. And you can either install the ones that it says are missing, because it should have shown you the name of the fonts used, or if you just click out of that little screen that popped up, it will automatically default to a different font family. Okay, so the next type of layer is a fill layer, and a fill layer allows you to create a layer with a solid color, a gradient of color, or a pattern. So in a way, it's similar to a pixel layer in that it's adding pixels of color to that particular layer, but you do have the option of the type of pixels based on these three options right here. Now this next type of layer is one of my favorite types of layers, and it's known as an adjustment layer. So adjustment layers allow you to work non-destructively, so you don't have to work on that background layer of your original image. So let's take a quick look at it. So here we have an image on a pixel layer, and then if I want to edit that particular image in a certain way and I apply an adjustment to it, it's being applied directly to that specific layer. Now if I close out this file and come back tomorrow, next week, next month, and I want to change it back to the original image, because maybe I converted it to black and white and now I want that color back, it's too late because I worked destructively. So instead we want to use adjustment layers, and if we apply a black and white layer adjustment above that particular image, it becomes a separate layer, so that edit is separate from the pixel layer below it. And then if I save this file as a PSD file and come back tomorrow or next week, I can go back to the original color image, because I can either turn off this layer, this adjustment layer, or I can delete it. So that's working non-destructively, and we're going to do a lot more of this type of editing throughout the rest of this course. Now, real quick, there are a ton of different types of layer adjustments that you can apply to your artwork. We're not going to go over all of them now. We will cover all of them in future lessons. But for now, I just want you to be aware that layer adjustments give you more creative control over your editing versus working on the pixel layer directly itself. Now, another important type of layer is a smart object layer. So a smart object layer could either be an image or a graphic, and it contains additional information inside of the layer itself that allows you to edit the contents of that specific layer. So right here, I have a layer that's considered a smart object, and we have that little icon right here that shows you that this is indeed a smart object. So anytime you see this, you'll know it's a smart object. So if you have a smart object and you want to edit the additional content or information inside of that smart object, double click on this icon down here, and then a new tab or a new window will open up showing you the content inside of that smart object. So now we can see all the different content or the different layers for this particular document. So if I turn this layer off, we can see the original color of the image. Then if I save it with Command or Control and the letter S and close it out, once we go back to our other document with that smart object, you're going to notice that the image has been updated because we made a change within the contents of the smart object. So smart objects are a little bit more confusing than regular layers, but just remember, a smart object contains additional information, additional layers that you can edit. And there's a lot of benefits to using smart objects in this way. And as we work on additional projects in the future, we will be using smart objects, and it will become much clearer on how to use them and why we want to use smart objects. But for now, let's go ahead and move on to the next type of layer, which is also a type of smart object. So this is known as a linked smart object. So our original smart object and linked smart objects work in the same way. There's content inside of this linked smart object that we can edit by double clicking on the icon. Now, the difference is the first type of smart object, the contents and the information and the layers are embedded in the document that you're working on. A linked smart object is a type of smart object that is not embedded in this document, but instead is linked to the original file on your hard drive. So if you try and edit this particular type of smart object and you don't have the original file on your hard drive, then you will not be able to edit the content. Now, because I do have the original linked on my hard drive, we can see it, but if you double click on it, you're not going to be able to edit that content. Now, our third type of smart object is one that is linked to the cloud or your Creative Cloud account. So again, you can edit the smart object if you have that particular file available in your Creative Cloud account. So here I have an image from Adobe stock that I have linked to my Creative Cloud account, and we can see the little icon down here in the bottom right of the thumbnail, and that shows me that this is a Creative Cloud smart object. So right now, this particular layer has a watermark over the image, and I don't have rights to this particular image. I can't use it for commercial purposes. So I have to license this particular file, and when I do, that watermark will be removed and it will be replaced with the original high-res file that I licensed for. So I can use Adobe stock images in my projects, and then once my clients give me approval for that particular project, I can then purchase the license for them. And then because the layer is linked to my Creative Cloud account or my Adobe stock account, it will automatically update once I license it. And we're going to talk more about Adobe stock images in a future lesson. For now, let's go ahead and take a look at another type of layer, and that is the frame layer. So anytime you use the frame tool and you add a frame, which is simply a placeholder for an image or graphics or even type, you will notice a little icon in the bottom right here that looks like this icon here, and that lets you know that that's a frame layer. So we're going to talk more about the frame layer in an upcoming section. Now, another one of my favorite type of layers is the layer mask. So a layer mask can be added from down here, and once you add it to your image or to your adjustment layer or other types of layers, you can precisely control how a specific edit is being applied to that pixel layer. So it gives you the precision and control for your creative vision. So instead of adding an adjustment or an edit to the entire document or the entire image, you can specify exactly where you want to place that specific edit. Maybe you just want to target the sky of a particular image, or maybe the face of a particular portrait. You can do so with the layer masks, and we're going to be using that particular type of layer a lot in this course. So we're going to leave it at that for now, and we'll go into more detail about this layer type and a lot of the other layer types as well in upcoming lessons and projects. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at the 3 different ways we can customize our layers. The first one is layer styles, and you can apply these types of styles or effects to both your type layers, vector layers, and your pixel layers. So you can add a stroke to an image and a drop shadow if you want, or you can apply color overlays to your graphic files or even your type layers, and there's a bunch more types of effects that you can apply through this layer style type. So we're going to cover all the different types of layer styles in an upcoming section. Next, we have blending modes, which are very cool and a fun type of customization that you can apply to your layers. So here we have a black and white image as well as an orange graphic. And when I apply a blending mode from this drop-down menu, it will blend that layer with the layer below it. So there's a ton of different blending modes to choose from, and we're going to go over all of these different types of blending modes and how you can use them in the blending mode section. So real quick, if I want to blend this orange layer with the image below it, if I choose overlay, we can now see the layers are blending together. Okay, we can also use our opacity and flow options to customize the layers that we're working on. So right now, I have a pixel layer right here of our landscape image. And even though it's turned on, we can't see it. And that's because the opacity is set to 0%. As I increase the opacity, the image becomes visible, and more so the higher we go. And then once we get to 100%, the entire image is visible. So that's one way of using opacity. There's other ways to use it as well. And we're going to be using it with our adjustment layers to tone down specific types of the edits. And we're going to learn how to do that in future projects. Now, I mentioned in a previous lesson that fill and opacity seem to work very similar, but they are indeed different. So let me show you how they are different. Now, if we take a layer, any layer, and we lower the fill down to 0%, you get the same effect as opacity. The image disappears. But here's how it's different. Let's go ahead and turn off this image layer and turn on this type layer here. And as you can see, there are some effects already applied to this type layer. So when we adjust the opacity of this text layer, we can see that the effects applied to the type and the text itself are becoming much more transparent, as we would expect with opacity. Now let's try it with fill. Now this time, the transparency of only the text itself started to become transparent and not the effects applied to that particular text. So that's the difference between opacity and fill. Okay, so those are the three main ways to customize our layers and the 12 different types of layers in Photoshop. Now that you have a general overview of all the different layers, it's time to move on and learn some more about how we can interact and use layers. And in the next lesson, I'm going to share with you how you can stack, copy, and delete layers. And there will also be an exercise file that you can use to practice what you learn. So if you're ready for that, let's do it.